I'm very happy to have Mr. Shashank over here, and I was surprised that an orthopedic surgeon is interested in mythology and Bhagavad Gita or such topics. And sir, we are very lucky to have him here, and I thank Ms. Agashe from Polytechnic College for introducing him to us, because this gives us an opportunity to listen to eminent personalities in the world, those who have done some different type of studies themselves, and with devotion he has done a lot of study, and in a very short time we come to know something about which we are not known, and that is the reason I really welcome you. Thank you, madam, for introducing me, and let us all listen to. However, I just for 15 minutes I will go out to finish my yoga class outside, and I join you in at around 12 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Never get a chance to speak to young minds, and maybe the reason for coming today was I will get to speak with you and listen from you as well. So this is not me talking all the time, but I want to hear from you, because you are the new generation, you have new ideas, your brain is not corrupted as such. So you will be able to tell me more from what I tell you. This interest was there all the time, and whatever she told from my biodata, I think there will be millions of people who do the similar kind of thing, and most of you by the time you reach my age will have done probably more than that. And I am thankful for painting it in a very beautiful picture. So a time will come when most of you will think that, what is the whole purpose of life? Everybody grows up, you study, you become something, you provide for the society, you provide for your family, and you get married, have children, become old and die. And there are some people who will achieve something which will be remembered, but I don't know what use it is to them once they die. If Einstein did something for us, Einstein is dead, and now we don't know what is the impact of his research on himself. Because for him, he always remained a very simple man, and he always said that, I am just another human being. So then you start thinking, what is the true purpose of life, and why should you be here at all? And sometimes if you think that way, if you close your eyes, you close your ears, and if you are asleep, the world doesn't exist. So the world exists because you want it to exist. You feel things, you hear things, you see things, and the world exists for you. If you shut off all sensory perception, the world doesn't exist. So everyone knows about Big Bang, that there was a Big Bang and the universe started, and after some time there will be a big crunch and the universe will collapse and everything will be gone. Then what is the purpose for this? Why should we all go through this trouble and face problems in everyday life? And most of you are here forced to come and listen to me, and probably you don't want to listen to me. So why to go through all this trouble? There must be a reason for this, and I still don't know what is the reason, but then you start thinking of other things. So there was a Big Bang, and energy came into being from nothing, they say, or they say from a singularity, energy came into being. And from that energy, matter was created. The first small particles which we know as quarks, which are of different flavors, they came into being. And matter itself is energy, if you don't know. Matter itself is energy. Each particle of matter holds its own energy, which we call as potential energy, and that is expounded when it comes into force. So if you have a grain of sand and you throw it, it releases its energy, which becomes kinetic energy. From that matter, if you study, you have in an atom you have protons, neutrons, electrons. Each have their own function, and when you study the periodic table, each element has a specific number of protons, and that decides what element it is. So initially, after when the universe was being formed, you had more of helium, and then you got hydrogen, and so on and so forth. Protons kept on getting added, and you got the different elements. And believe me, chemistry came because the alchemists wanted to create gold. So they thought that if it is so simple as adding protons together, you should be able to form gold. And nature has done it. Nature has produced all the elements and you have gold. Only we don't know how to do it. We don't know how nature has created gold. But it is possible. Those elements then formed compounds. And those compounds, they came together as a cloud. The cloud consolidated and you got the planets and the planetary systems. And in those planetary systems, there are millions of universes. One of them is suitable for life, which is called Goldilocks effect. So you will have, -1, +1, 0, and different gradations of universes. One of them is perfect to have life. The universe next to it and beyond it is not perfect to have life. So that is Goldilocks effect. If you remember the story of Goldilocks, she went into the bear's house and she tasted the porridge, and the father bear's porridge was very hot. Mother bear's porridge was very hot, and the little bear's porridge was just perfect. The little bear's bed was just perfect. So everything has to be just perfect for you to get a good result. So with the Goldilocks effect, it was our universe, our planetary system, which had Earth, which had the capacity or everything in place to form life. And there, once there were chances of life, these compounds joined together to form DNA, which is your genetic imprint or the code. Like if you have a phone, or you want to make anything, there is a program or a blueprint which you write down, and that blueprint, if you run it automatically, it starts doing its work. So the same way we have a DNA which has a genetic imprint of whether you will be a tree or whether you will be an animal, you will be a human being, you will be a girl or a boy, and the program starts to run on its own. That DNA formed a cell which is now a living thing which can survive on its own. It has its own energy source, it has facility to produce its own energy and make independent decisions. Those cells, when they join together, they form a system which does a particular work. Like you have a respiratory system, you have your liver which does certain work. So lot of cells come together, they form a system. And when systems join together, like you have a brain, liver, you have kidneys, when they join together, you form an organism. And that organism we consider as human being. But strangely, if you actually study yourself, you are made of air. Because you are made of very small number of particles which together form a big human being. But if it's an insect or a microorganism looking at you, you will see lots of spaces through you. And we are now arrived where we have gone through evolution, and from animals which live only for survival and reproduction, we have come to a stage where we question our own existence. We are questioning our own thoughts. We are thinking about things like, why are we here? What is the universe? Things which really, in the long run, will not matter. Because today, what you are more interested in is, how am I going to make a living? Where is my food going to come from? Whether you're going to get married to somebody, produce children, so your species continues, and when you die, what is going to happen to you? But it is commendable that now we have come to a stage that we are thinking that what is the necessity for all this? And that is important. That is important because that makes a better human being out of you, and that pushes your evolution much farther. So, as time goes by, because human beings have progressed only because they have recorded what they have learned. So, if you see any other animal, there is no way of passing intelligence. So they have to learn on themselves. But we as human beings, we record our experiences, we pass them down to our next generation. So that is why our intelligence keeps on increasing. So when I was in school, textbook was this big. Your textbook, I think, is this big. Plus you have internet and you have lots of access to a lot of intelligence which we did not have. So we are growing as a species, we are improving as a species only because we distribute our intelligence and our experiences. And some of them come down as mythology. So what is mythology? Mythology is a traditional story. You read about Krishna, you read about Mahabharata, and that is mythology because there is no proof. There is no one who can be traced back to say that this man actually experienced this and that is why it is true. But all of us agree to history because it happened. The Second World War happened, First World War happened. Why? Because people were there and they have written it down. But history also depends on who writes it. So usually history is written by the victors. People who win, they write the history and everybody has to believe it. So the good way of studying history is actually to present the sources. and each one should be able to interpret from the source which source to believe and which one not to believe. And that becomes a history. So one of the most important myths to be broken was about the Trojan War. So Heinrich Schliemann was, in school he studied classical Greece, and he studied that this is a mythological story about Helen of Troy and Trojan War. But he thought, it cannot be like that. Maybe this did actually happen. So he grew up, became a businessman, earned a lot of money, and actually went to Troy and discovered Troy. Not only did he dig down to Troy, he kept on digging and reached civilizations much before that. So the Trojan War actually did happen, and that creates a lot of impact because that tells us where we come from. So if the Trojan War did happen, then Achilles the god, was he really there, or was it just a story created out of fantasy to merge in with other stories? And then we start to compare history or mythology from across the world, and we come across similar stories. And then we start to think, if the world was not connected, there were similar stories happening all over the world, were they really true? So Krishna's Dwarka, as predicted, is now resurfacing. It is only a few feet below the sea. Some people have done underwater research and found out that, as described in the texts, the architecture which they see actually shows that this was the Dwarka of Krishna's time. So maybe Krishna was there, but we don't have any other proof. Recently there was a tsunami which devastated most of Southeast Asia. At that time, around Mahabalipuram, the sea actually went off, and a lot of the sea, ocean floor was exposed, and people actually saw a lot of temples. And these temples were described in the mythology, and even the local fishermen would pass on the tales that there are actually temples with pagodas. There are about 7 temples which nobody believed. Some people did underwater archaeology and said that there are structures which look like temples, but if somebody has seen but not the other, you tend not to believe it. And if something is fantastic, people always say, oh, that's fantastic, I don't want to be called a crank, and they tend to forget that. And that is the map of ancient India as it was, and some people say that is the original Atlantis, and all these temples were exposed. And then we hear, so now comes a dividing line where you start to think that some of the mythological stories might have been true. Even if they did not happen, what was described in them, like Vimanas, now we have aircraft. When Airbus A380 came out, the ad was always a place for another passenger. It was advertised to be that big. And if you see the Vimana through which Ram travelled back from Lanka, that is also described as always a place for one more person. And it's very interesting that Ram actually describes, there are only 2 pilots who can fly that Vimana. He actually goes and tells them where I want to go, because only they can fly the Vimana. And they fly the Vimana back, and while flying back, he describes to see the Park Straits connecting Sri Lanka to India, and they are still the same if you look at the world maps. And when they came into Ayodhya, it was dark, it was night time. So it actually takes that much time to fly from Sri Lanka to north of India. And some people say that the story of Diwali is actually them lighting the runway so that the aircraft could land. Facts of fantasy, but then some people like to believe that, some people like to keep an open mind about that. Then we hear the story of Ganesha. Ganesha was created out of nowhere, out of just a sandalwood paste taken out. That might have been, you can extract DNA from the skin. That may be just the DNA which is taken out and it is used to create Ganesha. But then Shiva didn't know that Ganesha is his son. So in the battle that followed, his head was decapitated, head was lost. So when he came to know that he is actually sort of my son, he said, okay, bring the head of any animal you find and I will fix it back. So they bring back the head of an elephant and he fixes it back and breathes life into it. So actually you start to wonder who is Ganesha, because the intelligence comes from the elephant. The body is of Ganesha. The original head is lost. So does that really happen? So in America there was a crazy neurosurgeon who thought that he could transplant heads and then prolong lives of people. So you get a new body and you just transplant your head onto the new body. So he did these experiments on monkeys. And believe me, some of the monkeys were available. There are videos on YouTube if you want to see. There is documentary footage of that experiment. But the monkeys were sacrificed after some time because they were paralyzed. We don't know how to connect the spinal cord. So even if people are alive, because blood supply going to the body and blood supply going to the brain, the body doesn't work, and then it is of no use. But there will be a time when we'll be able to repair the spinal cord. There are studies from China, and in our institute we have done some studies on stem cells to regenerate the damaged spinal cord. Results are promising. Maybe another 50 years we might be there. If we get there, then probably the story of Ganesha is no longer a mythology, then it becomes true. And then you start to question yourself. And that is why I came, because all of you have so fertile imagination. Some of you will pick this up, some of you will use it in your research, some of you will start relating the science that you read with what is available from the past. And you would not be the first ones. People like Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, they all used to read Eastern mythology and try to compare, because the time came when they were doing particle physics, they really don't know how to describe it in mathematics. And then they turned to Eastern mythology and found out all this has been described in the past, but described in a poetic sense, not in a mathematical sense. Shushruta was there not long ago, but at that time he could do, flaps. In those times, if you committed a crime, one of the punishments was to cut off your nose. But then people could not go around disfigured like that, so he used to take flap from the forehead, turn it around, stick it to the nose, and that was known as Shushruta's flap. And this flap was taken to Europe from the British missionaries who were working in India, and it is still known as the Hindu flap. But Shushruta says that this was present during Ramayana as well. If you know the story of Shurpanka, Lakshman had cut off her nose, but her brother was the king of Lanka. Very big man. So he told his surgeon that I want her to be beautiful again. So they did the nose flap. So the nose flap is not new. Nose flap can be traced back to very ancient times. So where did all this start from? So you start looking back and the contention today is we are Hindus, we belong to India, this is the Hindu heartland. But actually, if you go deep into reading things, you realize that it doesn't make sense. The geography doesn't fit. What we read in the Vedas about, 6 months there is no sun, and then 6 months it's only daylight, doesn't fit for India. It fits somewhere in the Arctic Circle. So it all started somewhere in the Near Eastern or probably around Mesopotamia. And the oldest evidence that we have is from Sumeria. And they had 7 tablets of creation. And those tablets actually said, when in heights, heaven had not been named, and below, firm ground had not been fought. So they trace their origin right to the formation of the planets. But they have another interesting story, where they say that there is another planet of our solar system, which has a very long orbit. That orbit is around 3,600 years, because it goes outside our planetary system and comes back. And every 3,600 years that it comes back, it creates disturbance. And if you study the natural chaos that have happened over centuries, you will find out that it's roughly around 3,600 years that you have had the major catastrophes happening. And maybe, we don't know when the planet will come back next time. We may see it, we may not see it. But surprisingly, this planet actually had a civilization. There were people living there, people who were like us. But people were advanced. They could travel through space. And they described that when the planet entered into our solar system, that is the time they let off a rocket, brought people to Earth. And while they were returning back, another rocket shot off the Earth, and they returned back to their home planet. And because their orbit is so long, their lives are also long. And I will come back and tell you about time dilation as well, why we think that the gods will return. So now, is there another planet which can sustain life? Yes, they have identified a few planets in other planetary systems which are equivalent to Earth and can sustain life. And NASA had been denying for decades together that Mars did not sustain life. There is no water on Mars, and there were a lot of conspiracy theories. America is full of them. They were saying all the time that there is water on Mars, there were monuments on Mars, and there was life on Mars. And actually, if you read Middle Eastern mythology, they will say that Cairo is Kahira. Kahira is red. it always said that Cairo, or the civilization of Cairo, was founded by people from Mars. And now we have a mission to Mars where we have found water frozen as ice. We have found water which is underground. So if there is water, there could have been life. And now NASA is saying that they have even enough proof to say that at one time Mars was as habitable as Earth. And it became a desert. Now they are worried that we will convert our Earth into a desert. So they want to study why that happened and how we can prevent that happening. But they know that we will eventually, like parasites, we will eat our own planet and then we need to move out. So they want to establish a program where they will first inhabit Moon, and from Moon they will go to Mars. The technology is there. The technology is there to sustain life. Technology is there to start a new life on inert planets. And Hindu mythology says, if you want to conquer the planets, the first step is Moon. We take it literally, thinking that it is more spiritual. These planets are spiritual. They are not spiritual. Don't interpret things, take them literally. If you take them literally, then yes, at one time probably, people from Earth did go to Moon and then they went on to different planets. So, if we are thinking of going and inhabiting Mars, why can't it happen that millions of years ago people from Mars came and inhabited Earth? Because evolution takes millions of years. Why did we have to think that evolution took place on Earth? Evolution could have taken place on some other planet, and the form product, which is human being, could have come here. So the story is very interesting. It is like the story we have today. So there were some gods or people, the Anunnaki, who were sent to Earth to mine the Earth for rare minerals and also for energy sources. And there were some who stayed back on the mothership orbiting the Earth. So they were enjoying life, having fun, and these people were working there. They said, we are all the same. Why are we doing the hard work? And why are we sitting there and enjoying? And they stage the reward. And like it happens in today's industry, strikes are usually held when something important is going to happen. So there was Football World Cup in Brazil, and everyone staged a strike because they were going to harness international attention. So the same way, their great leader, Ea, was going to visit Earth after 3,600 years. So that is the time they staged the reward. And there was no other way but to compromise. So they said, right, we have the technology to create an organism which is like us. So man created in the image of God but doesn't have our intelligence. Let's do some genetic manipulation. So the 3% of genetic information which makes us human beings will be taken away from him. So he'll do everything that we do, but he won't have our intelligence. So he will do all the work for us and we will sit and enjoy. So they decided, so they bled one god, took his blood, took out the DNA, they cloned 14 beings. And they identified women amongst them who could be surrogate mothers and give birth to these children. And it's very graphically described, wear your mask and put on your aprons and clean your hands and give birth to the children. So these children were born. And if you read Hindu mythology, the name is the same. So they created Adapa. And Adam was the first human being created by God. And we also have Nar Adam in our mythology. So Adam is lowest and Nar is human being. So the lowest human being is Nar Adam. So we also had a similar kind of creature living with us. So the first creations were half humans and half animals. So if you read the story of Gilgamesh actually went to search for immortality and almost found it. He reached the abode of God, but then he fell short and that's why he became mortal. But the person who accompanied him, Enkidu, was half human being. And we have similar stories. We have stories about Hanuman, Jambuvan, all living alongside Ram and discussing with him. And actually, Sugriv, Bali and Jambuvan, Ram used to consult them for strategical advice. So some of them were more strategically intelligent than Ram, but they were animals. And if anybody is reading anthropology, you will find now skeletal remains in many parts of the world which show that human beings and animals were living together. There were some beings, some species before us who were more intelligent than us but did not survive. And they did not survive because it is the survival of the fittest. So the Neanderthal man finished them off because Neanderthal man could live in a cold climate. He had learned to eat meat. He was smarter, more aggressive, and in the struggle that followed, he beat them. Not that actually he killed all of them, but slowly survival became difficult for the other species and the stronger species survived. And we have some of Neanderthal genes and some genes of Homo sapiens, and it seems it is the Neanderthal genes which give us diseases like cholesterol problems, heart problems, addictions like smoking, drinking, they come from Neanderthals. So all of us still are half creatures, we are still not complete human beings, we are a mix of both. So, coming back to the story, so the first men which were created, they were animals, so they don't need to bother that they are naked and they don't have a self-esteem, so they would roam around naked. And if you actually compare, if you see this god and you ask him to stand up, he would be bigger than these two. So he was a giant and these were smaller. So giants were there. So they have depicted things. Unfortunately, we do not use our intelligence to understand what they have written. This is all pictographic depiction. But if you know today, pictographic depiction is the best way to communicate information without knowing any language. Whether you go to France or you go to Africa, wherever you go, you can easily spot where the toilet is because you can spot the sink. And what does the Bible say? The Bible says God created Adam and Eve, but they had no understanding. But there was another God whose symbol was the serpent. He felt sad for them. He said, they should be like us. So he told them, go and eat from the apple, an apple from the tree of life, and that will give you the understanding which gods have. And then God came around on his tours to the garden, and he saw that his, Adam and Eve were hiding. So he said, why are you hiding from me? So come out. So when they came out, they were wearing clothes made of leaves. So he thought, oh well, they are hiding themselves. So now they have the understanding which I have, and now they are equal to me. So he asked them to leave the Garden of Eden because he knew they would survive outside. But he was more afraid that now they would challenge him. So man had become equal to God. And are we able to do that? So if that apple was not an apple as an apple, but if that was the missing link of genetic information, this is possible. So today with gene therapy we can treat a few diseases by converting them, like if you have Duchenne muscular dystrophy where kids' muscles become very weak and they are not able to walk. With genetic manipulation we can make it to a less severe form where they are at least able to ambulate and live for longer. So it is possible for us to do those things. And the DNA is shown in various inscriptions. Only you need to have a fertile imagination. And some people may argue this way or that. Who want to feel that it is DNA will argue that way. Who want to feel that it is not DNA can argue the other way. But the procedure is described as well, that Adam was put to sleep, his skin was cut, a rib was taken out, from that rib Eve was made and the wound was closed. So if God was so omnipotent and able to do things, why did he have to do a surgical procedure? But it is possible. Rib contains a lot of bone marrow, which will give you fresh supply of stem cells, DNA, and you can actually create a clone, and you can create a clone of Eve. So you can make that. So then we hear about creation and how the earth was created or how the universe was created. And the Bible tells you that on the first day, so first there was light, and then he created earth, he created water, he created the animals, plants, and on the seventh day he finished his work and he rested. That is why the seventh day is holy, and on the seventh day, most religions, you have to go to temple and worship. And in Hindu mythology, it says that Brahma creates the universe, but he creates it for a day. And after that day, he usually takes rest in the night, and then a new universe is formed. So, is it possible? Is it possible that universe can be created in one day? It is not possible in one human day. But if you look at cosmic time is much different. cosmic time is very vast. And if you take a day of cosmic time, that is, 1 day of Brahma's life, that spans to 4 million years. And can the universe be created in 4 billion years? Yes, it can be. It can be. So maybe what they were describing was in cosmic time, we are reading it from our understanding as human time. So these are the different calculations given for how time works in the universe. Time on different planets runs differently, time on Earth runs differently, and time on a massive scale in multiple universes works differently. So there is a story about the marriage of Balaram. So Balaram's wife actually was from the past. So her father in Kapurvi could not find a husband for her. So he took her to Brahma in Brahmaloka. And he said, I'm having difficulty finding a proper husband for my wife. So he said, oh, don't worry, there is one. He is told the year, that in this year you'll find him. He said, what are you talking? She will be dead by then, millions of years away. He said, you don't understand. This is Brahmaloka. Time runs differently. By the time you go back to Earth, millions of years will have passed. And when you're going back to Earth, follow the light. The light will take you to this city where you will find Balarama, and he is the husband for your daughter. And he goes there, but unfortunately, because Revati is from the past, she is taller than Balaram. So I don't know what Balaram does, but he taps her on the head with his mace, she becomes short. And then they get married. So is that possible? It's possible. So there is something called time-space dilation, or how much you travel away from Earth at the speed of light and how much time passes when you come back. So if God told you that I will return, maybe God will travel only 50 years, for example. 50 years will be quite a large figure, 2 million years to come back. If he travels for 10 years, he will come back in 24 years. So that way it is possible that gods may come back, but then they are what we are. So when Kapurni traveled, it was possible that Kapurni actually traveled in space at the speed of light and came back, and the Earth had changed. But they had not aged much. So were they really giants? So now students of physics will know that with gravity, the size of the organism differs on the gravitational force. So if the gravitational force is less, the organism is big. If the gravitational force is big, the organism is small. So maybe there might be giants because they might be coming from different planets. And everyone knows the movie Avatar, and believe me, I saw this cartoon on TV for a long time. I didn't realize what it was, but I thought he's stolen this name from Hindu mythology. And then I went and saw the movie. And I realized the story is similar to our concept of Avatar. So this man who is paralyzed is able to live his life through this being which they have created, which can live on that planet. They, as human beings, cannot live on that planet because their atmosphere is too stifling for them, so they have to use masks. But this organism can survive there. So he lives his life through that organism, and if that organism dies, he doesn't die. But if he dies, the organism dies. So sort of his thought processes go into that organism. And the avatar concept is a very important thing for us as Hindus, because that is what we have been learning from childhood, that God will return every time there is a problem on earth as an avatar or as an incarnation. And Vishnu lies in the cosmic sea. So this cosmic sea we have understood as an ocean or a sea. It is not. Cosmic sea is the space. There are many universes which are born like bubbles of water coming out from steam. And that is the massive ocean where this energy lies dormant. And that energy is not a person. So if you are searching for a God as a person, I think you will never find it. And that God is energy, and particles of that energy are in us. That is why we are all connected. So if someone says that if there is a butterfly flaps its wings in Africa, can it cause a storm in England? Yes, it can. It can, because everything is so strongly connected, as the physicists say, that one event causing a problem somewhere else can cause effects on the other side of the planet or other side of the universe as well. And if you have read the story of Yayati, Yayati could actually live in another person. So Yayati was married to Devayani and her father cursed him and made him into an old man. But he told his sons that I want to still remain young, and the person who gives me his body for 100 years, I will give the kingdom to him. So his youngest son says, okay fine, I'll be an old man for 100 years. So they exchange their souls, and Yayati could then live a life as a young man for 100 years, after which he gave up his body for food. So are there multiple planets, and is there life on other planets? So if you read the Bhagavad Gita, God tells that there are many worlds. You know, the highest in the material world is the lowest, and they are all places of misery. But when you go beyond your material vision, you go beyond the 3 dimensions, then that is the highest goal. So you keep on progressing until you reach God. So on the way I saw a movie called Eye Vision. And that movie is about a scientist who is doing study on the eye, because he feels that the human eye is the last bit of evolution, because it is so specialized, and the human eye actually is a direct connection to the brain. It is born from the same germ layers as the brain and your skin as well. So that's why when somebody touches the skin, it is very special, and it can be quite disturbing, because that is a direct connection to your brain. So he is studying the eye, and he is trying to mutate worms which are blind to give them vision. So his fiancée asks him, why are you doing this? If they are blind, let them remain blind. And if you are doing it, then obviously you believe in God. He says, no, I don't believe in God because I can't see him. So she says, this worm cannot sense light. We can sense light. That's why we see the worm. So for the worm, it is inexplicable to understand light or the sense of light. But we can understand it. So why do you think it is not possible that there is someone above us who understands other dimensions or has other sensory perceptions apart from the 6 senses that we have? Why do you think that is not possible? And it is quite possible. We can sense only the 3 dimensions. We can't control time. Time is not flowing. Time is there, but we are flowing through time. And there are other worlds. You know, there is dark matter around the world, and that dark matter constitutes most of the energy, most of the material that we have, but we can't sense it. We can only extrapolate from the effects that we see that causes on other planets, and that is why we know that there is some dark matter around. So if there is dark matter, then physicists say that there are at least six people like each one of us around in the world, exact copies of us. And there is at least one copy of us which is exactly the opposite charge. And you know that when positive and negative they join together, they tend to cancel each other out. So if you are sure that you don't have a twin, but you meet somebody who looks like you, don't go and shake hands. Because that might be a negative one, and both of you will cease places. Thank you.